everybody, and welcome back to another video from Northeast Christian Apologetics. My name's Simon Williams, and today we are going to be continuing our reading of Christian Apologetics by Douglas Groothuis. We are up to Chapter 12, The Design Argument. Please remember that this is a book study. It'd be great for you to follow along in your own book. You can get this book at Amazon.com as well as ChristianBooks.com. Please remember that the reason why I'm reading through this book and discussing it is because I host local classes on Christian apologetics that uses Douglas Groothuis's video lectures as a way of educating people on apologetics, and his video lessons are based off of this book. And the people in my classes have purchased this book and have told me that they have difficulty reading the material, either because they have a difficult time understanding it or because they suffer from some sort of eye problem, whether it be poor eyesight or dyslexia. And so I am reading through it in order to make this material more accessible. Okay, highly encourage you to get it because it'll be useful for personal study as a reference book. Even though Dr. Groothuis doesn't think that it should be treated as a reference book, you can still reference the arguments for the existence of God in it and things of that nature. So today we are going to be going into the design argument. This is usually the argument that is most respected by atheists. I also think that it is a good argument. There's a lot of different kinds of design arguments. And this one that we're going to be focusing on in this chapter is the fine-tuning of the universe. Mainly, we're going to be talking about how the laws of nature, when given mathematical expression, contain certain constants that appear like they don't necessarily need to be what they are. And we're going to be going into more detail on that as we go. I personally prefer a design argument that talks about the coherence and uniformity of reality, and how our universe seems to be very coherent, how things are constituted in space as well as with chronological coherence, how our universe seems to behave in chronological coherence. But the reason why I favor that kind of design argument is because if naturalism is your worldview of choice, then everything is a brute fact. And I talk about it in one of my videos that's here on YouTube. But yeah, if brute facts are a thing and causal connectivity is in question, then it just is the case that everything about the universe is a brute fact. And if it's a brute fact and there is no explanation for why things are the way that they are, then it could be the case that this universe is incoherent, could be chaotic. And I talked about that in the last video a lot, so I won't rehearse it here. And if you want a deeper dive into that discussion, then go ahead and check out my other videos on it. But yeah, we're going to be diving into the fine-tuning argument. So without further delay, let's go ahead and jump into the chapter. So Groothuis starts off with, "Are we orphans or citizens of the cosmos?" Choruses of secular voices, many of whom shout loudly from the scientific academy, insist that humans and the rest of the cosmos are nothing but the result of time, space, matter, energy, impersonal laws, and chance. This is our metaphysical pedigree. Our cosmic environment was not fashioned with us in mind. Many scientists proclaim this not as philosophical speculation, but scientific fact. World-renowned physicist Steven Weinberg famously said, "The more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it seems pointless." On the contrary, the Christian worldview affirms that the universe is the handiwork of a designing agent. The Creator brought everything into existence ex nihilo and engineered the structure and function of the universe. God made the earth by his power. He founded the world by his wisdom, and stretched out the heavens by his understanding. God has left his fingerprints in creation for us to discern. Human beings are symbols of the divine, being made in God's image and likeness. God placed us in a world suited for us, ready for development and cultivation. The universe is teleological. So let's highlight this right here. The universe is teleological. Now, oftentimes you'll hear people call the fine-tuning argument the teleological argument. And this teleology word is just talking about purpose, okay? There seems to be purpose behind things. And Dr. Groothuis is going to be talking about how we can determine whether or not something is designed. It deals with three things: contingency, if the object is contingent, which pretty much everything is. But then he talks about whether it has a specific purpose or teleology, and if it's complex. And a lot of times this is called specified complexity. So Groothuis continues, but the universe was not made for human beings alone. The non-human creation, heavenly and earthly, was declared good by God before the creation of humans. All creation was made for the glory of its creator, who calls it to praise its maker. Since humans are not the sole purpose of creation, there is no force to arguments by atheists that the vast amount of uninhabited space, also called waste, in the universe argues against God's concern for humans. A vast universe is compatible with both God's care for us and his glory, manifested in the rest of the universe. So Dr. Groothuis is very right on this. There's a lot of people out there that will look at the vastness of the universe and think that we are insignificant. I remember this Calvin and Hobbes comic where Calvin is out at night in his yard staring at the sky, and he's screaming up there. He's like, "I have significance," and said the dust speck. And we often forget that oftentimes a thing's value is in its scarcity, okay? If life, especially human life, is as scarce in the universe as it is, that just makes it more valuable. And also, the point of the expanse of the universe is to declare the glory of God. When we look at the universe, whether it be through the Hubble telescope or through the James Webb Space Telescope, we're struck by the beauty and grandeur and magnitude of this universe that we inhabit. It's incredible. And I don't know about you, but when Christians see these kinds of pictures of the universe that we inhabit, we praise God. It immediately draws us to want to give glory to God because of how great this place is. Anyway, Groothuis continues. The echoes of modern science trades on the claim that the universe, our planet, and our place on it is nothing special. This has been called the Copernican principle, based on the mythical idea that Copernicus's heliocentric theory displaced the Earth from its privileged position in the larger scheme of things. But this claim, made by Bertrand Russell and countless others, is false. It is based on the legend that pre-Copernican cosmology granted the Earth a privileged location in the center of the universe, geocentrism, a view that was discarded when it became evident that the Earth rotated around the sun, heliocentrism. Now, personally, I wish that Groothuis had said orbited the sun, but the rotation of the Earth is also a key feature of the evidence for the heliocentric model. In fact, the geocentric model did not flatter humans, but viewed them as living far from the more perfect realm of the physical heavens. Moreover, there is nothing in the Bible that correlates value or significance with location in the cosmos. Rather, human value is based on humans bearing the divine image, designed but fallen. When the Christian encounter reality claims that 1, the cosmos is designed, 2, signs of design are evident, and 3, these signs point towards the designer, it does not claim that 4, all the structures and processes of this designed creation now exhibit perfection. If we take the Christian worldview to be a hypothesis to be confirmed or falsified, the hypothesis must be stated properly. Part of this hypothesis is that humans in the surrounding universe are fallen because of human rebellion against God. Why God would create a world in which the fall would occur will be taken up in chapter 31. But the point stands that while Christianity predicts that design in nature will be evident, it does not predict a flawless world untouched by sin and corruption. This chapter and chapter 15 claim that there is enough design evidence at multiple levels of nature to infer that there is a designer. Moreover, there is also evidence of deformity, decay, and disease, indicating that the design is often less than optimal. Thus, there is enough evidence to believe in a designer, but not enough to claim a perfect creation. There is enough deformity to warrant the idea of the fall, but not enough to deface the idea of design entirely. Hence, we have evidence for both creation and fall in nature. The alternative would be no designer, which explains nothing, or an imperfect designer who did what he could, but not enough. The success of cosmological, moral, and ontological arguments which yield a self-existent maximal and moral being eliminate this spiriting possibility. One more point should be reiterated before we dive into design. All the theistic arguments work in tandem and should be assessed as such. The design argument does not bear the entire weight of establishing theism or Christianity. We have already given compelling reasons to believe that the universe was created by a personal and all-powerful being. This answers the question of cosmic origins, a titanic issue for any worldview. The design argument takes a closer look at what has been created and who designed it. Other design arguments. Philosophers such as Richard Swinburne have presented muscular inductive arguments from design that do not depend on the fine-tuning argument that will be given shortly, but invoke long-known aspects of nature. The cycles of the seasons, the orbits of the planet, the spectrum of colors, the beauty of the natural world, and so on. He argues that the complexity with respect to natural systems, regularity, simplicity with respect to basic laws, and beauty of the universe is much more likely on the hypothesis of theism than that of naturalism. That is, these commonly observed aspects of nature are better explained by a creative mind than by mindless naturalistic processes. While these arguments appeal to a broad variety of natural phenomenon, are meticulously structured, and are quite convincing, this chapter will appeal to newer and rather spectacular findings in cosmology. I should note, though, that even if the fine-tuning argument for a cosmic designer fails or is less than compelling, we may shift the ground back to the data that do not depend on it. Design detection. To the delight of theists and the horror of atheists, one of the 20th century's leading atheist philosophers, a man not reluctant to debate Christians publicly, renounced atheism in 2007 on the basis of the evidence for a designer and a creator. Anthony Flew, with a co-author, chronicled the reasons for this conversion to theism after half a century of atheism in his best-selling book, There Is a God. The reason he came to believe in a divine source is that the world picture that has emerged from science is best understood in these terms. Flew made no leap of faith. He remained a philosopher who wanted to follow the argument wherever it leads, but the evidence led him to a creator and designer of nature. To claim that anything, whether a computer, a living cell, or the entire universe, is designed means that it cannot explain itself. Its features indicate an intelligent agent outside of itself who is responsible for those features. We readily and frequently make distinctions between what is and is not designed. We can discriminate between a nest that has fallen out of a tree and a clump of bush at the base of the tree. This chapter and the following one will employ the design inference as a way of establishing design and ruling out other explanations. This has been rigorously developed by William Dembski. He lays out an empirical strategy for detecting design in nature and makes use of careful criteria. This method of detecting intelligent causes is already accepted in several areas of science, namely archaeology, forensic science, intellectual property law, insurance claims investigation, cryptography, random number generation, and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Intelligent design simply employs these methods of detecting or falsifying design and applies them to the natural sciences as well. Design is detected or inferred using an explanatory filter that strains out chance and necessity and checks for the marks of contingency, complexity, and specificity. An event or object may be reckoned the result of an intelligent cause as opposed to a non-intelligent material cause if it exhibits all three of these factors. Each factor by itself is a necessary but insufficient condition of design. But if all three factors are present, then this threefold cluster becomes a necessary and sufficient indicator of design. Now remember, this is an indicator of design, all right? So if you're looking at this argument and expecting like logical certainty, then that's not going to be the case. Remember, and we've discussed this a lot on this channel, but what we're looking for is reasonable inference. Are you able to make a reasonable inference from this information towards a particular point of view? All right. And what we're saying is that these three conditions that I've already mentioned earlier are a sufficient indicator of design, that you can reasonably infer design when these things are present. All right, so Groothuis continues. For Dembski, an event or object is contingent if it is not explicable on the basis of natural law. That is, if it cannot be explained by automatic processes. So let's go ahead and highlight this because this is an abnormal definition for contingent. All right. I've been using contingent in a way that means could have been otherwise. All right, it could have been otherwise. Here, we're saying that contingency means that it is not brought about or explainable on the basis of natural law. Okay? It cannot be explained by automatic processes. All right? For example, Dembski notes that a salt crystal can be explained on the basis of chemical processes described by chemical laws. Thus, it is not contingent, in the sense in which Dembski uses the term. However, a complex setting of silverware is not explicable on the basis of automatically functioning natural laws. We infer from its properties that it was laid out by an intelligent agent. While natural laws act on contingent events, gravity effects of place setting, natural laws cannot exhaustively account for them. Complexity is a form of probability. The greater the complexity, the less the probability that the event or object came about by chance, that is, without intelligent causation. All right, so let's highlight this. All right, so the first one was contingency, and the next one is complexity. Complexity is a form of probability. The greater the complexity, the less the probability that the event or object came about by chance. And I talk about a version of complexity in the video I mentioned earlier. But as Dembski notes, complexity by itself isn't enough to eliminate chance and indicate design. If I flip a coin 1,000 times, I'll participate in a highly complex, or what amounts to the same thing, highly improbable event. Indeed, the sequence I end up flipping will be 1 in a trillion, where the ellipses needed 22 more trillions. This sequence of coin tosses won't, however, trigger a design inference. Though complex, this sequence won't exhibit a suitable pattern to detect design. Consequently, contingency and complexity are necessary but not sufficient indicators of design. The last factor in design detection is specificity or specification. All right, let's highlight this. If an object or event is to pass successfully through the design filter, it must exhibit a pattern independent of its mere improbability. That is, the pattern of improbable and contingent factors must be specified ahead of time, not fabricated after the fact. Okay, let's highlight this. If you randomly throw a dart against the side of a barn from 20 feet away, the place where the dart lands would be improbable in the sense that it might have landed in any number of places. If you were to paint a bullseye around the dart and then remark on what an accurate dart thrower you were, this would be what Dembski identifies as a fabrication and not a specification. Okay? All right. I hope that you understand that. This is what he means by after the fact. Okay? However, if a bullseye is painted on the barn before the dart is thrown and the thrower hits the bullseye, the result is specified. This likely indicates skill instead of luck, especially if the results are repeated. On the other hand, chance and necessity can adequately explain the destination of the randomly hurled dart. The design filter attempts to locate instances of specified complexity in this natural world. All right? So I like that. This is what I was talking about earlier, specified complexity. Specified complexity is a mark of intelligence. Thus, it cannot be reduced to the factors of chance and necessity. Both in the universe at large, the subject of this chapter, and in microsystems, such as the cell and its information content, addressed in Chapter 15, the design filter has this structure. 1. X is either designed, or the result of chance, or the result of natural law, often called necessity, or the combination of chance and law. 2. X is not the result of chance or natural law, or the combination of both. 3. Therefore, X is the result of design. Thus, we may reasonably conclude or infer that design accounts for all the relevant aspects of X, leaving out nothing important, better than does chance or natural law. Consider a simple example. Okay, so this statement right here by Groothuis is not quite accurate, in my opinion, okay? Thus, we may reasonably conclude or infer that design accounts for all the relevant aspects of X, leaving out nothing important better than does chance or natural law. The thing about the design argument is that chance and or natural law or necessity must account for everything, okay? Everything. Even if there is one thing not accounted for by chance or necessity, then design is a reasonable inference. It doesn't even need to be the case that design accounts for all relevant aspects. If there's any aspect of X that is better explained by design, any aspect of it, then design is a viable inference. And so there's some sort of intelligence behind it. Okay? Groothuis continues, upon visiting Mount Rushmore, we do not need to be informed that the faces of the American presidents did not appear in rock through patterns of erosion caused by wind and rain. While natural law and chance explain the surrounding hillside, the faces of the presidents cannot be so accounted for, given 1, their contingency, 2, their complexity, and 3, the independently specified pattern of the president's faces. We can detect design independently of knowing who or how something was designed. We know that an eccentric artist, Gutzon Borglum, spent his last 14 years carving the 4 faces of American presidents into Mount Rushmore, but that biographical knowledge is unnecessary for spotting design. Consider a mysterious mountain discovered on Mars that bears a resemblance of 4 jazz musicians, Duke Ellington, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, and Ella Fitzgerald. Call it Mount Jazzmore. We infer its intelligent design not because we know who made it, we do not, but because of what it is. Like Mount Rushmore, Mount Jazzmore displays 1, contingency. It does not have to be there. Okay, so this little statement right here by Dr. Groothuis is more in alignment with what is typically called contingency. It doesn't have to be there. It could have been otherwise. But remember that in specified complexity, we're talking about contingency, meaning it was not likely brought about by natural processes. Number 2, complexity, the artistic detail, and 3, specificity. It matches 4 faces we know from history. However, some reject design explanations in principle, claiming that they use the failed God of the gap strategy, invoking the supernatural instead of working out a sufficient naturalistic explanation. Put another way, the God of the gaps brings in God only to cover our ignorance of the physical world as a kind of deus ex machina to explain certain phenomena. And this is a big mistake on challengers' parts. We do not need to infer that the intelligence that created Mount Jazzmore was God. We could believe that it was some sort of alien intelligence, but it definitely has the hallmarks of intelligence. Whether it be an alien or an extra-dimensional being is another matter. That's another conversation. What's not reasonable to infer that it formed out of the repeated bombardment of asteroids. You know what I mean? But what we're going to be talking about with regard to the universe, it's reasonable to infer that the specified complexity that we observe in the entire universe is better explained by God or God-like being. Anyway, Groothuis continues, the claim is that naturalistic scientific explanation always trumps any explanation depending on factors beyond the physical world. However, this narrative is naive and often begs a question in favor of naturalism. While it has sometimes been shown that an explanation requiring divine intervention has been adequately replaced by one that appeals to natural laws, this does not rule out the possibility that a divine explanation may be a better explanation for some natural phenomena. In fact, as we will see, naturalistic explanations for cosmology and biology are becoming increasingly strained, question-begging, and untenable. Although much more can be discussed about this issue, suffice it to say that the design inference is not based on ignorance of the natural world, but on knowledge about it, especially given recent discoveries in physics, fine-tuning, and biology, the molecular machines in the cell and DNA specifically. Those who reject all design explanations in principle have committed the logical fallacy of begging the question in favor of naturalism. If so, their naturalistic theories become unfalsifiable and impervious to counter-evidence, traits that are hardly theoretical virtues in the philosophy of science. Yes, naturalism itself, if it actually is true, is unfalsifiable and it's also unverifiable. You can't verify that naturalism is true if it actually is true, and you can't falsify it if it actually is true either. So we don't have any justification for believing it. Since even if naturalism were true, we can't have justification for believing it, there's no point in believing it, even if it were true. You could never know that it's true. Upcoming chapters will address the attempt by Darwinists to delete design from living organisms and the arguments for and against the design inference applied specifically to biology. This chapter investigates the fine-tuning of the universe as a whole, thus revealing God's existence, designing intelligence, and wisdom. Fine-tuning design. The specific conditions of the universe at large reveal an intricate and finely tuned ensemble of factors that make embodied human life possible. These are called anthropic coincidences. These are necessary conditions for the existence of life as we know it, and all are balanced on a razor's edge. Can these elements fit into a naturalistic worldview? Now, I personally like the way that Dr. Groothuis has worded this in particular. These are called anthropic coincidences. These are necessary conditions for the existence of life as we know it, and all are balanced on a razor's edge. Okay? So particularly I'm talking about the existence of life as we know it. Other people who have run the fine-tuning argument, like Dr. Craig, have geared more towards saying intelligent life or just life in general. But our experience of life is very limited, even though we have an entire planet full of life. It is just one planet, and we're all carbon-based life forms. And whether or not other forms of life could exist is very speculative, but metaphysically possible, or even perhaps physically possible. And that's the point. There are certain kinds of people out there that do try to escape the fine-tuning argument by saying that we don't know all the variety of kinds of life there are possible. But when we talk about life as we know it, we're a very fragile kind of life, and only certain kinds of conditions will permit life like us to exist. So this is a much more modest approach to the fine-tuning argument, which I think is much easier to defend. What we're arguing for in this book is life like the kind of life that we observe, life like you and me. Anyway, Groothuis continues, several decades after the Big Bang cosmology began to marshal its credentials for an absolute beginning of the cosmos, something with similar implications began to boil among scientists who study the basic physical conditions of the universe. Theistic apologists have often argued that the conditions on Earth were uniquely fitted for all of life and for human beings. But only fairly recently have scientists discovered just how many variables must be set precisely for human life to occur in the universe. These discoveries fit in with the Big Bang scenario because they concern what the initial conditions of the universe must have been in order for the universe to be conducive to life at all. All right, so I recommend you highlight this. All right, because especially this part right here, conducive for life at all. The fine-tuning argument is not intended to argue that the universe is finely tuned to produce life. That is not the argument. The argument is to say that the universe is finely tuned to be suitable for life to inhabit it. Proponents of this argument are not saying that the universe is finely tuned for life to arise. It's just saying that it is finely tuned for life to inhabit it. So if you hear atheists saying that the universe isn't finely tuned because life is so sparse in the universe, that there are more black holes in the universe than there are life, they're just missing the point of the argument. It's irrelevant that the universe produces more black holes than life. What we're talking about is habitability. Okay? But first, a preliminary objection needs to be faced. Philosopher of science Bradley Monton notes that fine-tuning arguments are dogged by scientific technicality, which I personally tend to agree with. Okay? That's one of the reasons why I personally don't run the fine-tuning argument when I'm speaking with people. I will defend it or aspects of the finely tuned universe in writing, but when you're confronting people in conversation, it is a difficult argument to run. Anyway, Groothuis continues. Unlike some other arguments for the existence of God, unless a person is well-versed in physics, it is somewhat difficult to assess the claims made about cosmic fine-tuning by the experts. This is true, but it need not disqualify the arguments. We often appeal to expert testimony in forming conclusions on controversial topics. Our rational certainty concerning the particularities of physics will vary in accordance with our knowledge of the subject, but scholarly opinion strongly favors the claims that the universe is finely tuned for life. The phrase fine-tuned, as it is used here, is a neutral description that does not prejudice the issue toward a theistic or non-theistic interpretation. It simply means that many aspects of the universe are closely calibrated and make human life possible. Stephen Barr, a physicist, lists 11 very prominent physicists who have written in defense of fine-tuning, including atheists Stephen Hawking, Martin Rees, and Steven Weinberg. Nevertheless, a few disagree. That the preferred non-theistic explanation for fine-tuning is the highly speculative multiverse theory, explained later, gives credence to the claim that physicists are in general agreement that the universe is carefully fine-tuned. Otherwise, they would not need to have recourse to such grandiose theorizing in hopes of explaining the universe without a designer. All right, so a little story about this argument. When I was at Millstone, I used to work there as a leading nuclear chemistry technician, and I had office, and in my office I had a billboard with all the arguments for, well, a lot of the arguments of the existence of God hanging up there, and one of them was the fine-tuning argument as presented by Dr. William N. Craig. And my supervisor at the time challenged the argument. He walked into my office and he was like, I don't think that argument is true. And so I asked him how he would explain the fine-tuning of the force of gravity. If it is changed, then it would make life unmanageable. It would make it so that life could not inhabit the universe. And he says, I have no idea what you're talking about. And it's like, well, if you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, then you're not well positioned to make judgments on the argument. And taking the time to explain everything took a long time, and he still didn't really understand what I was getting at, because it is a difficult argument to understand. But what Groothuis is appealing to here is that we can refer back to experts that say that the universe definitely is fine-tuned. And so you don't have to get into the exact numbers, which is beneficial, but it still makes the argument kind of unwieldy in a conversation, like I said earlier. Anyway, so Groothuis continues, before inspecting the evidence for design, an analogy may help. Consider a self-enclosed habitat for life, biosphere, found on Mars. In the control room, we find a panel of dials which set exquisitely precisely for a life-permitting environment. There needs to be just enough heat, oxygen, moisture, air pressure, and so on for the inhabitants to survive, since the outside environment would not allow it. No one would infer that this biosphere arose without intelligent thought and agency, that it could be explained by natural laws and chance events alone. If so, then how much more would we infer design if we found that our entire cosmos was finely tuned across a broad and deep range of physical values to support life? The basic argument states that without a designer, given the odds, a life-forbidding universe would be much more likely than a life-permitting and human-friendly universe. Our universe is much better explained according to a mind that fine-tuned it for life. A deft summary of the anthropic situation is given by Patrick Glynn. The fine-tuning of seemingly heterogeneous values and ratios necessary to get from the Big Bang to life as we know it involves intricate coordination over vast differences in scale, from the galactic level down to the subatomic one and across multi-billion-year tracts of time. The various anthropic factors are numerous, and their explanation can become quite technical. However, we can summarize them by considering initial conditions, constants, and laws. The physics of fine-tuning. Let us begin at the beginning with the Big Bang. The initial conditions of the universe are crucial for a human-friendly cosmos. Although Stephen Hawking resists the theistic implications of the Big Bang, he states, if the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, the universe would have recollapsed before it ever reached its present size. On the other hand, if the expansion rate at 1 second had been larger by the same amount, the universe would have expanded so much that it would be effectively empty now. Hawking also notes that if the electric charge of the electron had been only slightly different, stars would have been unable to burn hydrogen and helium, or else they would not have exploded. It seems clear that there are relatively few ranges of values for the numbers, for the constants, that would allow for development of any form of intelligent life. More sets of values would give rise to universes that, although they might be very beautiful, would contain no one able to wonder at that beauty. Considering what was built into the Big Bang, physicist Roger Penrose discusses the implication. How big was the original phase volume that the Creator had to aim for in order to provide a universe compatible with the second law of thermodynamics and with what we now observe? The creator's aim must have been precise to an accuracy of 1 part in... Now, I'm going to mention here that there's a typo in this book. So this is 10 raised to the 10 raised to the 123, which is so big. So big. This is an extraordinary figure. One could not possibly write the number down in full in the ordinary denary notation. It would be 1 followed by 10 raised to the 123rd successive zeros. Even if we were to write a 0 on each separate proton and on each separate neutron in the entire universe, and we could throw in all the other particles as well for good measure, we should fall far short of writing down the figure needed. This is the precision needed to set the universe on its course. All right, I think that we need to talk about this number a little bit. If we were to say 10 raised to the 10 raised to the 2, that is just 10 raised to the power of 100. This number is a 1 with 100 zeros after it. This number is called a googol, and it is a huge number. But there's a bigger number than that that has a name, and it's called a googolplex, which is a 10 raised to the 10 to the power of 100. All right, so 10 raised to a googol. That's a googolplex. That's the biggest number that we have with a name, unless you count infinity, but we're not here, or left null and all that stuff. We're not counting those. We're counting natural numbers. This is a number that is bigger than that, and it's significantly bigger than it. Okay, this is absurd. It's usually understood that there are 10 to the 80 atoms in the universe. This number is so beyond ridiculously huge. It's literally inconceivable. Literally inconceivable. Anyway, Groothuis continues, concerning this number, Penrose has also written that I cannot even recall seeing anything else in physics whose accuracy is known to approach even remotely a figure like 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd power. So they almost got it here, but 10 raised to 10 raised to the 123rd power. So huge. So huge. Astronomer Sir Martin Rees is also impressed by the numbers and argues that the mathematics required for human life boil down to just 6 numbers. These numbers were built into the Big Bang and must have the precise values they possess for our world to be hospitable to humans. Rees notes that if any one of the numbers were different, even to the tiniest degree, there would be no stars, no complex elements, no life. The numbers control both the smallest and largest aspects of the universe. Lemley summarizes the features of these 6 numbers. I think that we should highlight this. These 6 numbers are important for this argument. Okay. Number 1, the strength of the force that binds atomic nuclei together and determines how all atoms on Earth are made. 2, the strength of the forces that hold atoms together divided by the force of the gravity between them. 3, the density of material in the universe, including galaxies, diffuse gas, and dark matter. 4, the strength of a previously unsuspected force, a kind of cosmic anti-gravity that controls the expansion of the universe. 5, the amplitude of complex irregularities or ripples in the expanding universe that seed the growth of such structures as planets and galaxies. And 6, the 3 spatial dimensions in our universe. Life cannot exist if it were 2 or 4, contends Rees. All right, so the fact that we have 3 dimensions, 3 special dimensions, length, width, height, okay? If each of the 6 numbers Rees has identified were dependent on the others, in the same sense that, say, the number of arms and fingers in a family depends on the number of family members, the fact that they allow for the existence of life would seem less of a shock. At the moment, however, says Rees, we cannot predict any of them from the value of the others. So unless theoreticians discover some unifying theory, each number compounds the unlikeliness of each of the other numbers. Moreover, the strength of the various forces of nature fit into the very narrow window necessary for human life. These are mathematical constants that do not vary, but neither do they possess their values by any kind of necessity. They could have been otherwise. Consider only 2. If the strength of the strong nuclear force were even slightly weaker or stronger than it is, it would have been disastrous for the possibility of life, claims physicist Stephen Barr. This force, one of the four basic forces in nature, along with gravity, electromagnetism, and the weak interactions, is required for the way atomic nuclei are conjoined and therefore what kind of atoms are possible. Barr notes that if this force were only 10% weaker, it would not be strong enough to produce the elements that we now have, except for hydrogen. If so, no life could exist. If it had been only 4% stronger, stars would have lasted a much shorter time, thus imperiling life. The same goes for gravity, the weakest of the four forces. Robin Collins notes that if the strength of gravity were changed by 1 part in 10,000 billion relative to the total range of strengths of the forces of nature, which span a range of 10 to the 40th, there would likely be no humanly populated world. One quick note that I'm going to make here with regard to talking about Robin Collins and his 1 part in 10,000 billion relative to the total range of the strengths of forces of nature. This is an important and often misunderstood aspect of the fine-tuning argument. Where does he get this number from? What he gets is contrasting the strength of the strongest of the four basic forces with the weakest of the four basic forces. Okay, so the strong nuclear force is the strongest and gravity is the weakest. And what we discover when we contrast the strengths of these two forces is that the strong nuclear force is 10 to the 40th power times stronger than gravity. And if we were to increase the strength of gravity 1 billion-fold, then life would not be able to exist. And this is how Robin Collins gets this 10,000 billion number. When you say that you increase the weakest force by 1 billion-fold, that would make the strong nuclear force 10 to the 31st power times stronger than the force of gravity. And that's where he gets this 1 part in 10,000 billion. When you work out those numbers, it's a 1 with 31 zeros after it. Okay? Many people often think that if you change the force of gravity by 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, then you get issues. But that's not the calculation. Collins is just using a thought experiment saying if we increase the force of gravity 1 billion-fold, then no life is going to be able to survive. Imagine right now if the force of gravity was increased by 1 billion times. If you weighed 150 pounds, that would mean that you weigh now 75 million tons. You know, that's that's insanely heavy. By contrast, the heaviest animal that's ever lived is the blue whale, which can get up to 200 tons. And the only reason why it can survive being as big as it is because it lives in the ocean. You know, so nothing would be able to be that heavy. It would be absurd. And that would just be the size of a human. A human would just be that heavy. Now, that would be just 1 part in 10 to the 31st power. Even though 1 billion-fold sounds like a lot, given the range that is possible given the forces that we're working with here, that is a very small change. That's a very small change. 1 part in 10 to the 31st power. Very small change. Another benefit to how Collins goes about doing this is that when you do the calculation with the strength of the forces that we're dealing with here, like, for example, the force of gravity is normally calculated out to be 6.674 times 10 to the negative 11th power. And that force of gravity, if we say that it's the weakest, and if we can increase it, then any number bigger than that number is a change within the realm of reason. If we're saying that the only reasonable values that the forces can maintain is between the weakest and the strongest, then if we increase the force of gravity by anything, then it's within the realm of reason. The problem is that there is an unaccountably infinite number of possibilities with regard to the strength that these forces can take within these ranges. Okay? An uncountably infinite number of them. You can make a million zeros after that 4, and if you place a 1, that is an increase. But you can always add more zeros in between that 1 and the 4. So it's an uncountably infinite. And when they recognize this, people will say then, well, if there is an uncountably infinite number of variables, then the calculation becomes indeterminate. You can't determine what the probabilities are. But that's not what we're talking about here. When you go the route that Robin Collins is going here, in like parts per million, parts per billion, that kind of stuff, just multiplying it by a billion-fold, you avoid all that, all of those calculations. You don't need a precise number in order to run this argument. So all of that becomes irrelevant. And so this is a very powerful argument, and a lot of the criticisms that are launched against it are made in ignorance. Okay, so let's continue on with the argument and see what Dr. Groothuis has to say. So Groothuis continues, although more anthropic coincidences could be cited, I will give just one more. Collins is particularly impressed with the value of the cosmological constant. He believes that the inference to design from fine-tuning can rest on the value of this factor alone, if it cannot be explained naturalistically. The cosmological constant is the part of Einstein's equation of general relativity that deals with the expansion rate of the universe. Physicist Steven Weinberg, an atheist, notes that the cosmological constant does seem remarkably well adjusted in our favor. Although it could have been any value, first principles suggest it would have been very large, either positive or negative. In fact, had this been so, life would not have been possible. Collins states that if the cosmological constant were not fine-tuned to within an extremely narrow range, 1 part in 10 to the 53rd or even 10 to the 120th of its theoretically possible range of values, the universe would expand so rapidly that all matter would quickly disperse, and thus galaxies, stars, and even small aggregates of matter could never form. According to Collins, the likelihood of this constant occurring by chance is that of randomly hurling a dart from outer space and hitting a bullseye on the Earth that is less than the size of one atom. As Barr says, this is one of the most precise fine-tunings in all of physics. Esteemed mathematician and astronomer Fred Hoyle provides an able summary of this diverse and amazing fine-tuning data. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics, as well as the chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. In The Privileged Planet, Gonzalez and Richards argue the fine-tuning argument by making the impressive case that the Earth, in particular, was designed not only for life, but for the scientific discovery of the universe. These findings contravene the commonly heard observation that the Earth is really nothing special in the universe, just a pale blue dot when observed from far away, as the popular astronomer Carl Sagan put it. But there is more to be said. The fact that our atmosphere is clear, that our moon is just the right size and distance from Earth, and that its gravity stabilizes the Earth's rotation, that our position in our galaxy is just so, that our sun is its precise mass and composition. All these factors and many more are not only necessary for Earth's habitability, they also have been surprisingly crucial for scientists to measure and make discoveries about the universe. Mankind is unusually well positioned to decipher the cosmos. The book argues that there is a staggering number of contingencies that must come together to make Earth habitable, as well as an ideal place to observe the rest of the universe. This deepens and expands the fine-tuning argument to account not only for human life, but also our role as discoverers and stewards of scientific knowledge. The fine-tuning of the universe suggests this argument. 1. The fine-tuning data are the result of either A, chance, B, natural law, C, a combination of chance and natural law, or D, design. 2. They are not the result of chance or natural law, or a combination of both, since the data are contingent, complex, and specified. 3. Therefore, A, the data are the result of design. 4, therefore B, there is the designer. This argument will be filled out as we answer objections to it. Objections to the fine-tuning argument. The staggering contingencies required for life to exist in the universe have not led all observers to revere the wondrous work of God. There are 5 main naturalistic explanations of this data. 1, the truism objection. 2, the inscrutable odds objection. 3, the chance one universe hypothesis. 4, the multiverse theory. And 5, the more fundamental law objection. We will also consider a pantheistic explanation for fine-tuning. Truism objection. The truism objection is sometimes called the weak anthropic principle. This book was written before a famous song by Cardi B came out. There is a panoply of fine-tuned factors in the universe, all of which are necessary for our existence. But so what? If they were not there, we would not be here to notice. This fact is sometimes called the selection effect or selection principle. That is, evolution selects for conscious beings who can know and adapt to the world. After citing several features of the universe that are remarkably fine-tuned for life, Martin Rees notes that some would argue that this fine-tuning of the universe, which seems so providential, is nothing to be surprised about, since we could not exist otherwise. It is undoubtedly true that unless the necessary conditions for life appeared, we could not chart the necessary conditions for human life, because we would not be here as observers. That is a mere tautology, but this does not describe the fine-tuning argument for design. The case for design argues that what is antecedently unlikely is necessary for the very possibility of conscious beings knowing it. So this statement is a little complex, but what is meant by this word antecedent is just that the pre-existing conditions. We're talking about the fact that the universe is life permitting. Okay, that is an antecedent condition that is necessary prior to conscious beings inhabiting the universe. It must already be the case that the universe is life permitting. And what we're asking for is why. We're not asking why is it the case that humans are here to observe it in such a way. We're asking why the universe itself is actually life permitting when it's so ridiculously more likely that it would be life prohibiting. And Dr. Groothuis is probably going to go this way. Now, remember, it's been a while since I read this book. I have read this book a couple times before now, but it's been a couple years. I think that he goes this way where it's a classic firing squad analogy where there is a man who is sentenced to die by the hands of a firing squad, and it's 50 trained marksmen, and the supervisor of the execution says, "Ready, aim, fire," and all 50 trained marksmen fire the weapon, and yet the condemned man lives. And he looks down at himself and he thinks that he's unharmed. It would be inappropriate for that condemned man to say, well, obviously they didn't hit me or else I wouldn't be here to wonder about this. No, what would be the appropriate response is, why am I alive? What's the most likely situation? Are all 50 trained marksmen going to miss by happenstance? Or is there some sort of intelligent designer at work here? And it doesn't need to be God, obviously. It could just be that there was somebody who replaced all the bullets with blanks or something like that. You know, some sort of intelligence behind why that condemned man lives. Okay? So Groothuis continues, it is this vast and overwhelming improbability, the tremendous odds against human life given all the possible worlds that would prohibit human life, that generates an argument to the best explanation. That is no tautology. All right, so please remember that this fine-tuning argument is not a deductive argument. This is an abductive argument. This is an appeal to the best explanation. So it could be logically possible that the universe just happens to be this way by chance. But why should we prefer chance when design is so much more reasonable? When the odds are so crazily absurd, like we're talking about here in this argument, then it seems much more reasonable to infer an intelligence rather than just to say that this happens to be the case, even though that the odds are so crazily absurd. Groothuis continues, those who invoke the Truism Objection in order to reject fine-tuning as evidence of a fine-tuner refuse two distinct but related ideas. One, for humans to observe human life permitting conditions, those necessary conditions must obtain. Otherwise, humans could not observe the human life permitting world. This is a truism or tautology. As such, it explains nothing. Two, the necessary conditions for this human life permitting world themselves need to be explained. This is a world that must exist in order for humans to observe their human life permitting world. This claim is not a truism or tautology, and as such, it raises fundamental philosophical questions that demand answers. Those who say that observing human permitting conditions is no big deal and should prompt no philosophical questions should consider this illustration. You stand quaking before a firing squad of 10 carefully trained veteran marksmen who have been ordered by their country's dictator to execute you for crimes against their country. You hear ready, aim, fire, followed by the explosions of 10 guns. However, This is not the last thing you experience. You see the 10 executioners staring at you. You feel no pain. There are no wounds. You cry, "What happened?" The squad's commander locks onto your questioning eyes and exclaims, "Why be so surprised? If they had all hit you, you wouldn't be here to wonder why." True enough, but this is trivial and irrelevant to the query. It is only logical to conclude that there is some reason or explanation why all 10 members of the firing squad missed their target. That they all missed is required for you to wonder why they missed, but the mere fact that they all missed is not sufficient to explain the fact that they missed you. The theory that they all missed by chance is far less likely than that they all missed for some particular reason. Maybe they were bribed, for example. To seek that reason, the explanation for this remarkable fact only makes sense. Similarly, given the antecedently unlikely vast configuration of finely tuned variables required for human life, an explanation is most assuredly in order. The fact that these anthropic features occur is not comparable to the fact that someone must win the lottery. However, unlikely it is that any one person who enters will win it. Any possible world with or without life would be improbable, but a human life-permitting universe contains a feature that conforms to an independently discoverable pattern. Specification, namely the multitudinous requirements for life itself. Any gibberish pounded out by a chimp at a typewriter, random action, will be improbable. But if we enter the room where the chimp was typing and we find a long and beautiful sonnet, we would not infer that the randomly typing chimp was its author. The words and arrangement of words in the sonnet conform to a pattern, information, independent of mere probability. The semantics, grammar, and syntax of the sonnet. We would thus infer an intelligent author. As Craig notes, in the same way, physics and biology tell us independently of any knowledge of the early conditions of the universe what the physical conditions requisite for life are. We then discover how incredibly improbable such conditions are. It is this combination of a specified pattern plus improbability that serves to render the chance hypothesis implausible. Inscrutable odds objection. Now, remember, I talked a little bit about this earlier, okay? Walter Sinow Armstrong and Keith Parsons protest that the odds of a universe that is life-permitting are simply inscrutable, not low or high. They reason that one can calculate probabilities for things within the space-time world, but not for the world as a whole. We know the odds of being dealt a royal flush, for example, since we know the number of cards and type of cards involved. But the odds of the universe having the unique features it possesses is something entirely different. This is inscrutable given the stark uniqueness of the situation. Therefore, no designer can be inferred from the apparent fine-tuning, since the odds of the universe occurring by chance or by design are indiscernible. Yet it seems that there are far more possible human life-prohibiting universes than possible human life-friendly universes. Consider this ratio. A, the actual life-friendly universe, fine-tuned, or possible other life-friendly universes, if other universes' arrangements could permit human life. B, possible life-prohibiting universes, that is, not A. The ratio of A to B is extremely small. We obviously do not have various cases of universe-generating situations to compare ours with, since our universe is one of a kind. But the uniqueness of our universe does not rule out the consideration of probabilities, since other universes are logically conceivable. Moreover, we rationally consider probabilities for singular events in other situations. An illustration from John Barrow is helpful. Put a red dot on a piece of paper representing our human-friendly universe. Now vary the fine-tuning data slightly a very large number of times. When we get a human-friendly universe, assign another red dot. When you get a human-prohibiting universe, assign a blue dot. You will end up with a sea of blue dots and only a few pinpoints of red. Craig summarizes Barrow. There are simply a vastly greater proportion of more life-prohibiting universes in our local area of possible universes than there are life-permitting universes. All right, so I personally do not think that Dr. Groothuis really addressed this challenge here. When you talk about what Parsons and Sinow Armstrong are saying here is that we don't know the range in which life-permitting universes are possible. There could be different kinds of laws that make life-permitting universes abundant. But we're not talking about just any kind of laws here. We're talking about laws in accordance with what we observe in our universe, the kind of universes that have the kinds of laws that we have. If you're talking about other universes that contain laws that would make life-permitting universes abundant, that's irrelevant to this conversation because we're talking about universes like our universe. Universes that have our laws, but when those laws are given mathematical expression, those constants that are contained within those laws can have a variety of different values. And I already talked about earlier how the values of those constants could be considered inscrutable because they could be any number of uncountably infinite number of values. Even if you do limit the range from between the weakest force and the strongest force, saying that, well, we only have evidences of forces from this range, this low range of gravity, this high range of the strong nuclear force. And so we can reasonably infer that the strength of the forces could be any value between those high and low values. But even still, that would be uncountably infinite, and therefore the calculation would be inscrutable. But we're not doing it by each individual value. We're doing it by parts, okay? And when you take the parts, then you can definitely do this calculation. If you do multiply the strength of gravity 1 billion times, then life just isn't going to materialize. Life is not going to be supported. And that is a very small change given the range that the forces could take. But these challengers will also say that and I'm not saying that Parsons and Armstrong say this, but there are atheists out there like Fodor who will say that perhaps there are possible universes that have our laws and that there's a combination of values that constants could take that individually would not allow life, but nevertheless, in various combinations, will permit life. But again, that's just displaying naivety, because if you have gravity 1 billion times stronger, it doesn't really matter how you adjust the electromagnetic force or the strong nuclear force or the weak nuclear force. The gravity will crush the creature no matter what you do with those forces. They're irrelevant. Dr. Groothuis might mean what I just said here in this section of the chapter. I just don't think that he made it as explicit as he could have. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on with the next challenge. Chance, one universe objection. One might argue that this fine-tuning for life is simply the result of chance, an undirected random effect of the Big Bang. While this is mathematically possible, it is exceedingly unlikely given the vast odds against it, as previously noted. For these random, naturalistic explanations seldom invoke chance as the explanation for fine-tuning. If there is only one universe, the chances of it containing the vast contingent panoply of life-permitting features are amazingly infinitesimal. This has caused some thinkers to posit some version of the multiverse theory, sometimes called the many-universe, multiple universe, or world ensemble theory. Yeah, this is good. The multiverse theory. Faced with the evidence that the fine-tuning of the universe is best explained by a mind, naturalists such as Steven Weinberg and Martin Rees have posited that our human-permitting universe is simply one of a vast, perhaps infinite array of universes. While the odds of only one universe being life-permitting apart from design are extremely remote, the odds get better if we multiply actual universes mightily. If you throw the cosmic dice enough times, an extremely improbable universe will eventually come up. As Moreland and Craig write, the many worlds hypothesis is essentially an effort on the part of partisans of the chance hypothesis to multiply the probabilistic resources in order to reduce the improbability of the occurrence of fine-tuning. Davies claims that a growing minority of scientists support some version of the multiverse theory. It comes in several sub-theories, which can be put into two broad categories. First, the many universes multiverse theory claims that the universes are completely isolated from each other, with no common grounds in terms of physics. The number of universes is actually infinite, so everything logically possible happens in one universe or another. One thing I'm going to note here, the number of universes is actually infinite, so everything logically possible happens in one universe or another. If it is actually infinite, the number of universes, not only would everything that is logically possible happen in one universe, but there would be an actually infinite number of universes in which the exact same events and situations happen, okay? So this would also be part of the inscrutable odds challenge. Groothuis continues, the second claim is that our universe is part of a multi-domain universe, which is causally connected at a deep and as yet unknown level, but in which each domain is isolated from the rest. The most popular of these theories recently is the inflationary theory, which claims that the Big Bang triggered an endless progression of universes with one succeeding another. The multiverse theory should not be confused with Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation in quantum mechanics, according to which, in addition to the world we are aware of directly, there are many other similar worlds which exist in parallel at the same space and time. The existence of other worlds makes it possible to remove randomness and action at a distance from quantum theory and thus from all physics. This is a controversial interpretation of the strange world of quantum events, but it was not formulated as an attempt to explain fine-tuning. Rather, it was devised to solve the collapse of the wave function problem. While it does seem to solve some problems in quantum theory, it generates significant others and is massively counterintuitive. Even as such, it is not the favored theory in the difficult field of interpreting quantum mechanics. Moreover, as Barr notes, even if the many worlds interpretation is correct, it does not mean that different parts of the universe will have different effective laws. That is an added assumption. But it is precisely these different laws that are needed to increase the probabilistic resources sufficiently to designate our universe a random freak of the universe fit for life. Thus, Everett's interpretation seems to provide little, if any, support to the multiverse theory. The many universes multiverse theory is nothing more than metaphysical speculation, and very poor speculation at that. To posit that everything that could happen does happen in some universe ontologically separated from all the rest is bizarre and gratuitous. It is invoked without logical basis simply to avoid a designer. I recommend you highlight this because it is 100% true. There is no reason to conflate the actual and the possible in metaphysics. Moreover, we could never know by any observation or inferences drawn from observations that the other universes existed. Therefore, as Barr notes, few physicists adopt it. The multi-domain version of the multiverse theory is less extravagant than the many universes multiverse theory and commands its share of adherents. This is because, if true, it would help explain some unresolved problems in physics. Moreover, it is theoretically possible to confirm the existence of other domains indirectly if the fundamental laws of nature are discovered and experimentally proven to be correct, and it is found that they mathematically imply the existence of other domains. The hottest domain theory recently is the inflationary model by Andre Lind. While this theory still lacks independent evidence, it would unite Einstein's theory of relativity with quantum mechanics, which is no mean feat. However, its success requires the truth of string theory, which itself is highly questionable. At best, this theory is a popular post-dated check or hopeful wish. As such, unless one is a priori committed to naturalism, it does not give a better explanation than design. But there are other severe problems with the multiverse theory. If a multiverse theory posits an actual infinity of existent universes, then it must face the objections to the existence of an actual infinite, which were given in Chapter 11 on the Kalam cosmological argument. Let us label one half of the universes A and the other half B. If we subtract A from the total number of universes, the result is still an infinite number of universes. But since a total cannot be both itself and half of itself, this is impossible. Therefore, there cannot be an actually infinite number of universes, either simultaneously or stretching forever into the past. But even if an actual infinity of universes were not impossible, the existence of such an assembly is colossally improbable. There is as yet no independent evidence for multiple universes, although the multi-domain version postulates possible evidence. These supposedly many universes are unobservable in principle. Their existence must be inferred. But the overarching reason to infer their existence is the desire to deny a designer and still explain the fine-tuning of physics. But by arguing from what we know, we observe that specified and improbable patterns evince a designer. This inference to design is a can-do principle used throughout life and in various scientific fields such as archaeology, cryptology, forensics, and so on. As Collins points out, it is more rational to frame an explanation in terms of what we know given independent evidence than to appeal to unsubstantiated theories that, if true, would explain the data. Consider dinosaur bones. The best explanation for their existence in the fossil record is that dinosaurs died and left parts of their skeletons as fossils. We infer this because we know that other similar animals, which we have observed, have skeletons, die, and leave fossils. However, if we appeal to a dinosaur bone-making field to explain the strange remains, we invoke something utterly unknown as an explanation. There is no reason to do so, especially since a better explanation is close at hand. Similarly, there is no warrant to invoke esoteric theories of multiverses, all lacking a designer, when 1, we know how to spot design, and 2, the fine-tuning of the universe is most readily explained in terms of a designer outside of the universe. Barr notes that in order to abolish an unobservable God, various multiverse theories require an infinite number of unobserved substitutes. A far simpler and more commonsensical explanation is that fine-tuning is due to the work of one designer. In short, the multiverse theory appears to be flagrantly ad hoc, lacks experimental evidence, and is exceedingly complex. All things being equal, a theory, scientific or otherwise, would be as simple as possible, so long as it explains the data in question adequately. Criteria 8. The multiverse theory is more like an extravagant theory of metaphysics than anything dependent on empirical science or reasonable theorizing. This is true. The multiverse theory is definitely departing from physics and going into metaphysics, which is the domain of philosophy. Okay? And it is a consequence of naturalism. Another side effect of the multiverse theory is that even if it were true, one could still rationally infer a God. And the reason for that is because when we're talking about metaphysics, we're talking about worlds here. And this multiverse theory has many, many universes in it, but it's still just one world. And we still need an explanation for why this multiverse exists rather than just a universe by itself exists. And I think that the best explanation for why one could say that the multiverse exists rather than just one universe, the choice between these worlds, these separate, definitely different worlds, is that God chose to actualize the world in this way. It would be an undermining defeater of the fine-tuning argument, but once again, we're not able to actually detect the other universes, so we can't really prove it. So it's like the multiverse argument in no way defeats the belief in God. It doesn't undermine it. It doesn't defeat it in any way. It is a necessary consequence of being predisposed to naturalism. Naturalists have a very limited number of explanations that they can use, and so they have to cling to this one. But a Christian can be like, okay, the multiverse exists. Now what? I still believe that God exists. That is no problem with me. It definitely does not need to be the case that this universe is the only universe that God created. God could have created an actually infinite number of other universes. There's really no issue here. We as Christians can follow the data where it leads, but naturalists have a very limited number of explanations that they can cling to. And I've said it in other videos, and I'm going to say it again. There are no explanations available to the naturalists that are not equally available to the theists. Okay? A theist can use any explanation that a naturalist can use, but they can use a lot more explanations than a naturalist can use. Remember, a naturalist world is very limiting. It's very limited. We need a lot more justification to limit the scope of reality than to not limit it. And since naturalism is so limited, we need much more justification to limit it in that way. And we have no justification for us to limit it in that way. Naturalism is just an absurd worldview to me. I don't know why anyone holds to it, to be honest with you. It is just, it's more limiting. It can't be justified. It can't be verified. It can't be falsified if it is true. So it's like, there's literally no reason. No reason whatsoever. And we don't have enough. It's just so bad. So bad. Anyway, Groothuis continues, undaunted by the evidence, Richard Dawkins claims that the multiverse theory trumps theism for two reasons. First, a designing God would be just as complex as the universe and would thus fail as an explanation of the universe because the designer itself would have to be explained. Second, the multiverse theory is simple, since each universe has a simple set of natural laws. In response, first, even if God were as complex as one universe, that would not disqualify God as the explanation for fine-tuning. If we discover artifacts on Mars that evidence life, complicated telescopes or intricate statues, for example, we would rationally infer that these artifacts were designed by rational agents and are not the result of merely natural and unguided causes. The fact that these agents, Martian or otherwise, would themselves be complex does not foreclose their existence as the proper explanation of the advanced artifacts. Second, God, as classically conceived by monotheism, is not a collection of contingent physical states, unlike the Mars artifacts and their designers. God is rather an immaterial and self-existent being. Therefore, God is neither a complex thing nor subject to further explanation. Dawkins's claim that the multiverse is a simple explanation is false. The fact that each universe has natural laws does not make the overall, perhaps infinite ensemble of universes, the multiverse, simple, since each universe could vary from all others in the nature of its laws, entities, and processes. It's ridiculously complex. And especially if you consider the world as an infinite sea of chaos, all it is variability. Every single aspect of it is a brute fact, which makes it absurdly complex. More fundamental law objection. Another theory that accounts for fine-tuning without a designer is the appeal to an unknown and impersonal natural law that is more fundamental than any of the laws we now know. If chance cannot explain the fine-tuning of one existing universe, and if multiple universes are impossible, unlikely, or incompatible with design, as Collins argues, then an appeal can be made to physical necessity or natural law. This explanation would eliminate the need to account for the contingencies of fine-tuning by invoking the necessity of lawful behavior. If some super law is found, the universe had to be the way it is. However, no such grand natural law has been found, and any hope of finding it is only speculative, a cosmic post-dated check. While physicists hope for a theory of everything, it has not been found. Thus, it cannot count against the design hypothesis. Another thing to note about this is that even if there were found a super law that made the physical world, all of its behaviors and everything necessary, it would still be the case that we could ask, why is it the case that that super law is actual rather than not? What kind of necessity are we talking about here? Are we talking about physical necessity, or are we talking about metaphysical necessity, or are we talking about logical necessity? Because the world that we inhabit seems very contingent. So it would imply that this super law is only physically necessary. So it's necessary for this physical world to exist as it does, and it explains all the supposed fine-tuning of a physical world like this one. But why is it that this physical world exists rather than some other one? Why is it that this physically necessary law is actual rather than not? These are the kinds of questions that come up, and it doesn't provide any explanation, just kicks the can down the road. So Groothuis continues, but suppose a theory of everything were discovered that revealed one super-duper natural law demonstrating that all that seems contingent is really physically necessary. Physically necessary. Would this eliminate design as the best hypothesis for the resultant universe? No. The postulated natural law itself would be improbable and specified for life to exist. That is, it might have been otherwise. As Bertrand Carr and Martin Rees have written, even if all apparently anthropic coincidences could be explained in terms of some grand unified theory, it would still be remarkable that the relationships dictated by physical theory happened also to be propitious for CEL, conscious embodied life. The relationship between the purported law and the life-permitting features would still be remarkable because the concept of necessity that applies to a natural or scientific law is not that of logical necessity, but of physical necessity. That is, if the law obtains, all the supposed contingencies of the universe are explained in terms of this law. But the law itself is not a necessary truth, as is the law of non-contradiction or the law of identity. The proposed physical law might not have existed at all had there been no universe, or some other meta-law might have obtained if there had been another universe instead of this one. That is, there are many logically possible worlds in which this law does not obtain. Moreover, this supposed law is highly improbable in that it unites a plethora of seemingly disparate elements in a remarkable fashion. As Gonzalez and Richard notes, it would be like making the opening shot of a a game of pool and having all the balls directed into every available hole. Except in this game, you would have far more balls than a game of common pool. All right, so even if this law does provide a unified theory of the 4 basic natural laws, that doesn't explain the initial conditions of the universe and a lot of other features. It's too narrow. It doesn't explain everything. There's no reason to prefer it over a design hypothesis. So it's just like these naturalistic explanations are the best that they can come up with, but they're extremely weak. They're extremely weak. And so why should we prefer them? That is the question that we need to be asking all the time. Why should I prefer my worldview over a competing worldview? Why should we prefer naturalism over theism? There's literally no reason. No reason. But, if you want to be your own God, then you got to deny God somehow. Anyway, Pantheism and Design. The case for theistic fine-tuning is more plausible than any appeal to chance, single universe or multiverse, or to a unified impersonal natural law without a designer. The theistic interpretation also trumps a pantheistic one. The God of pantheism is not a personal creator, but an all-pervasive and impersonal substance, usually taken to be ineffable. The design evidence rules out this kind of deity for 3 main reasons. First, the argument for fine-tuning by a designer trades on the common sense notion of the subject-object relationship. That is, we are subjects who evaluate the cosmos's nature. There is a distinction between the knowers and the known. By contrast, pantheism is typically non-dualistic, which eliminates any distinction between God, the universe, and the self. Thus, it supposedly transcends the contingencies that the fine-tuning argument trades on and makes God, cosmos, self into a necessary being. However, the world is a very poor candidate for a necessary being, since 1, it came into existence a finite time ago, given the Big Bang and a cosmological argument, and 2, its contingent features take values that are not logically necessary. Second, the inference to a designer contradicts the idea of an impersonal being, since design requires intelligence. A being who designed the universe for human life must be immensely intelligent, a mind, and have the power to bring about what this being intends, an agent. In other words, this is a person and is not impersonal. The God of pantheism cannot fit this theological profile. Third, if a pantheist claimed that God is ineffable and known only through non-rational mystical experiences, then no rational argument, fine-tuning or otherwise, can support this God's existence. A question mark or an empty placeholder explains nothing. Tuned in to the designer, we conclude that we live in a designer universe. It is not explicable by chance, by law, by a combination of chance and law, or by an impersonal God. This designer is thus singular, since appealing to more than one designer violates criterion 8. Outside the universe, transcendent, a personal agent, having a mind to conceive the fine-tuning and the will to actualize it, and immensely powerful, given the complexity and scope of the universe. I argue that the seeming flaws in design, more evident in biology than cosmology, are due to the fall, not to God's nature. Moreover, the ontological argument rules out the idea that God is less than completely good. A maximal being must be perfectly good. Or less than completely powerful. A maximal being must be perfectly powerful. The ex nihilo cosmological argument also allows for a being who is omnipotent, since creating everything out of nothing indicates limitless power. If these arguments stand, we should fall in humility before this being, seeking further knowledge of who this God is, what God might give, and what God wants. But there's more evidence yet at hand, this time coming from a realm that naturalists tell us has been utterly fumigated of any design or objective meaning, the fascinating world of biology. And with that, we've reached the end of the chapter, and you know what that means? That means that we get to celebrate. Yeah! Woohoo! Woohoo! Excellent work. Excellent work in through all that with me. I hope that you liked this chapter on the fine-tuning argument. I hope that you like the teleological argument. There are a variety of different kinds of teleological arguments or fine-tuning arguments. Remember, teleology deals with purpose. And purpose is a mark of intelligence. So if we can show that there seems to be purpose behind the universe, then that is indicative of design. Remember that we are looking for instances of specified complexity, and those specified complexities make it rational for one to infer design. Okay, whether it be human design or some sort of intelligent design, but definitely is indicative of design. And if you're talking about the universe and you see what appears to be antecedent conditions of specified complexity, that indicates a designer. And that means a designer that is transcendent over the universe. All right. So it is a being that is beyond the universe. And remember that even if the multiverse is true, the design argument may not be as effective, but that doesn't rule out God. Even if it is true, or even if we somehow prove that it's true, if we were actually able to prove that the multiverse is true, then this design argument is not effective. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. And also, as a last note, remember, naturalism is a trash worldview. There's no reason to be a naturalist. Look elsewhere. Challenge it. Ask questions. If you're critical of theism, use the same critical eye on naturalism. Turn that critical eye on naturalism and see how weak it is. All right. Anyway, I'm excited to talk to you about the argument from beauty. And from the argument from beauty, we're going to be going into discussing biology. And that's going to be a couple chapters. All right. So it's going to be interesting for sure. Anyway, I really appreciate you guys being with me. If you lasted this long, I commend you. Great job. Very impressed with you. Anyway, I will see you next time. Thank you for being with me for this, and God bless.